2 days ago, I watched Francis Ford Coppola's love child of a movie, Megalopolis. And I had taken an interest in this movie since the first trailer started popping up and the first reviews from Cannes started popping up, where the premise at first, it kind of intrigued me what Coppola was doing, but then more so I was interested after all the horrible negative reviews, essentially talking about this being one of the worst pieces of film ever made. It being too self-indulgent, it being artistically too bizarre, inconsistent, having poor writing, having poor acting, the effects being strange, all of that made me want to watch this film even more. So 2 days ago, me and my partner went to the cinema and watched it, expecting to see something truly god-awful. In fact, as we were going to the hall, I mentioned how, might miss some of the trailers. We didn't, but I said jokingly that, usually you're here to watch the trailers for worse movies than the one you're watching, but today we're gonna be doing the opposite and seeing trailers for better movies we could be watching. Which turned out to be sort of ironic foreshadowing, because the trailer we saw right before Megalopolis started was for Gladiator 2, which looks like complete ass, and I have zero interest in seeing that compared to this movie, which, at the end, I guess I was almost disappointed, because instead of seeing something truly awful, seeing the modern version of The Room, I actually watched a film that I quite enjoyed for all its faults and weirdnesses. And so I decided I should give a pretty thorough review of it, but I will be splitting it up. At the beginning here, I will try and avoid spoilers as much as I can, although I recognize people will probably be searching for reviews of this film, especially positive ones, I imagine. Not really caring about spoilers, but don't worry, I have a more in-depth look into, the film and what I think about it in the middle part. But if you are avoiding spoilers, I ask that you do watch the ending part. I will be putting down little chapters for how far you need to skip ahead, because there is a kind of a sweet point, I guess, I want to make at the end of this video on why I think this film was even made in the first place. I will start here by talking about the negatives, because I think for a film like this, for a film lambasted this much, for a film mocked this much, it's the most honest way to start the review off. Recognizing the faults which have made a lot of people hate this movie, and even so many people walk out of screenings of this film quite upset. And there's quite a lot, and there have been certain scenes and bits of dialogue and character writing that have been, propagated through the internet, showing the weakest points of the film, which are definitely there. There's this particular scene where the character Julia is, speaking with the main character, Adam Driver's character, Caesar Catalina, and it is so silly. This scene is, I think this scene is probably the peak of the terrible writing in this movie, and it is very early on, and it feels like just poorly written fanfiction at moments, and it's a bit of a mismatch in this scene, and it gets better, I feel like, later in the movie. It does improve, but it feels like a mismatch between and I don't know if I'm pronouncing the name correctly, Natalie Emmanuel is trying to achieve with Julia's character, and Adam Driver with Catalina's character, where it seems like Julia was sort of, trying to stay grounded despite how bizarre the story and the writing was, and Adam Driver was going all in on it, which led to this wonderful scene of him going, "Yes," repeatedly, which is honestly, in hindsight, amazing. I like that a lot because it's stupid. And the entire scene is also filmed in this very weird way. There are moments where the way the camera cuts, the way the camera moves, the direction of scenes, where and in this scene, I think it's at its worst, where the scene will have this one single continuous shot as Julia walks around the room, pointing out things and very rapidly trying to show us Caesar Catalina's character with his medication being expired, and there being bottles of alcohol laying around. But then suddenly it will just cut to another shot of the same scene, despite how previously it had been doing this whole single shot thing. And the end result is kind of jarring, but I feel like this is nitpicking, but at this point in the movie, because I was expecting something terrible, I guess I was mentally nitpicking it just a little bit. There are also other parts of the film which are quite bizarre, like certain character names. It feels like the characters halfway are, you know, all named after these famous Romans, right? So like Catalina, Caesar, Cicero, Claudio being Clodius. But then you have these other characters with names like WoW Platinum, which seems very bizarre, and I presume that there's something about it, something about the different strata, different castes of the society being, you know, the individuals regarded in the highest esteem have these distinctly Latin names, and then, you know, the common folk get names like WoW. But it's never really explained or mentioned in any kind of way, except for a single scene where WoW Platinum's name is lampshaded a little bit as someone asks her, "Is that Greek?" Which again might mean that this is a class thing. This is another high-class character asking her, who I assume grew up, you know, in the slums or something. But without that explained in any kind of capacity, we're just sort of left to guess, and maybe it's just that, yeah, WoW is just a weird goddamn name to have as a person. It feels like also the world building was supposed to be important. There are a lot of somewhat artfully done shots of various cultural interactions, and you have the Roman sports being played in the arena in New York. You have the scenes of, you know, the American culture intertwining with this Roman culture. But again, it's never really brought up in any kind of meaningful way. And it ends up being a little bit confusing if you try to think about it, where you're not really sure how the Roman culture persisted, if American history seems to be largely unchanged. It's unclear, you know, how New Rome it operates within the United States, because the United States clearly still exists, but the New Rome and the United States seem to be synonymous with each other, and obviously I guess it's the same as, you know, ancient Rome. The city was synonymous with the empire, but it's again not really clear or explained in any decent fashion. Because if you are curious about these things, Coppola never answers them. There's nothing about the broader culture, nothing about the broader politics of the country, about international affairs. Nothing about that is ever shown, which again doesn't necessarily mean it has to be shown, but instead you get answers to questions like, I wonder if Saturnalia is celebrated alongside other winter holidays. Yes, it is. But I don't agree with some of the criticism. I don't think that the plot is as incomprehensible. There are points where the plot simply trails off in a direction you weren't really thinking it would, and then it sort of struggles to finish off certain threads in the story, or has them end in a very, I would say, rather unsatisfying way. Certain things just kind of happen and you're left to wonder how they work, like certain business dealings that occur, because at the end, you know, at the beginning the movie is focused on just Caesar Catalina and making the megalopolis happen. Then there's the romance subplot. There is a subplot regarding Catalina's uncle Crassus and his money and WoW Platinum. There is a political subplot of Cicero being the current mayor, but about to be, you know, there's about to be another election or something, and Claudio gets involved, but also I guess Catalina is involved in the election, but again, never mentioned, he's just there. It seems like this story really tries to put as much drama from every kind of avenue all into the same thing, and the end result is that it does seem slightly rambling and strange and inconsistent a lot of the time, and also you end up with an ending where I was personally going, oh, I guess the movie's over now. You know, the ending is probably a pretty weak point, but there's something quite you know, nice about it that I do like quite a lot, and I do want to talk about, but that's gonna come at the very end. Overall, I was expecting like a sub 3 out of 10 experience at the very least, but I ended up, I guess I would rate it about like a 7.5 out of 10. It has its flaws, but it was actually quite enjoyable. It was especially enjoyable to me, and this is where I start talking about the positive side of it, as a history major, as someone who was interested in Roman history, and whose actual bachelor paper, my bachelor paper was written about the period of time in question, you know, during the era of the triumvirate, of the rivalries of Julius Caesar, Pompey, Cicero, Crassus, and of the Catilinarian conspiracy, which is an aspect that I absolutely adore about this story, is that I don't know why it didn't register to me before I watched the film. It didn't register to me that his name is Caesar Catalina. And I think there are probably people that went into this the whole thing thinking, oh, Caesar, you got Crassus somewhere over there, so this is about the triumvirate, but the notable thing here is there is no Pompey, there is no character that represents Pompey, there is no direct political, ideological rival to Caesar Catalina, there is no Pompey, but there is a Cicero and a Catalina, making this a quite phenomenal and surprising retelling of the Catilinarian conspiracy. The extremely abridged version here is that during the time when Cicero was consul in Rome, he dealt with this Catilinarian conspiracy led by a man named Catilina, or Catiline, who was a disgruntled and unhappy Roman magistrate who had gathered around him a large following of other dissatisfied magistrates, because at this time it was quite difficult to get through the cursus honorum, the rankings of the Roman Senate, which ultimately was the political life goal of most magistrates at the time. But there was a limited amount of people that could even be in the Senate. Dozens of senators would constantly be cycling in and out of it without ever having achieved a particularly high ranking. So all of these people who were discarded by the Roman Senate, by the politics of the time, people that were in debt, people that were unhappy, people that wanted change of any kind, they ended up following Catiline. And there is a scene that I will talk about later in the spoiler part of the video that is the point at which I went, oh my god, this absolutely is the Catilinarian conspiracy. And it's kind of amazing how, I will say, this is probably the best retelling of the Catilinarian conspiracy, considering the fact that the second most notable retelling of it comes from Cicero himself. Cicero is in fact our entire source on anything regarding Catiline, originally. He wrote an epic after he had already, spent his year as consul, dealt with this thing, prosecuted Catiline and all of his followers. Well, I say all of his followers, there were still ones that were around that he didn't get to, and other people he, accused that were like, I have nothing to do with this. This, in fact, Julius Caesar was implicated, but ultimately not punished for it. He was implicated in the sense that he said, well, maybe we should stop murdering all of these, conspirators because of, like, some vague suspicions, when there are also senators, and he was also almost murdered in the Senate for that, but that's neither here nor there. Cicero wrote an epic about his time as consul, and it was considered at the time to be one of the worst pieces of Latin writing ever. It was so bad, in fact, that no extant copies exist anymore. There is no way to read the entirety of Cicero's epic about his consulship. And then this movie's existence is kind of poetic in a way, because this is the film that Ford Francis Coppola funded himself. I believe he put in, I may be wrong on the numbers, but when I went to watch this at the time, I read that it had cost $134 million, and on its opening week, it had made $4 million. It was that poorly received. But it was Coppola's own money, it was all Coppola's own doing, and so I would say half of Coppola's real-life personality and character in this story, I think, goes into the character of Cicero. One thing I also want to add here, Ford Francis Coppola deserves some kind of massive award because he might be one of the only guys in like a decade to cast Giancarlo Esposito as someone other than Gustavo Fring. Seriously, this man has been typecast like this for so long that it's just nice to see him play Cicero, who is not a brooding, soulless, calculating villain character. Yeah, he's still the antagonist, but he's an emotional man. He is, has plenty of faults. He is not, a calculating sort. He is not a brilliant mastermind. He is just a guy, and that is so nice. And in fact, the entire cast, I would say, as much as people talked about the wooden acting in this, I didn't feel that at all personally. I think the actors were quite suited for their roles. I think Shia LaBeouf really knocks it out of the park, playing a little piece of shit in Claudio. Quite very brilliant. And the entire cast, I would say, ranges from alright to pretty great. And I'm gonna start talking about the story and the spoilers here, so if you want those, if you want to avoid those, please go ahead and skip to the end right now. Initially, the entire story is built on the conflict between Catalina and Cicero, with Cicero being the unpopular mayor of New Rome and being quite conservative and even regressive in his views of society and what ought to be done, and Catalina being this genius progressive inventor trying to fix all of society's problems in the future. And the framing of this never really changes, which is, I would say, also kind of a weak point, but at the same time, if we're talking about Roman politics, it's not like the historic Cicero was that much of a problem solver. He was more of a problem pointer-outer that went, you see, these are the problems with society, and you know what's gonna help? Tradition, probably, somehow. We need more of that. Never mind the fact that those traditions are what led to the problems in the first place. And this conflict sort of permeates throughout the entire story, the conflict specifically between Catalina and Cicero, culminating in a scene which was preceded by this very strange, but actually of the strange artsy scenes in this film, of these montages that exist in the film. This was probably my favorite one because Adam Driver was going absolutely nuts on screen, like flailing his arms around, and there were some cool effects being done and pretty nifty editing and acrobatic show going on with the entrance of the gladiators being played in the background. Very appropriate, very cool, very, very nice. Caesar is accused of having relations with a Vestal virgin, which, by the way, real thing that happened in history as well. Caesar was actually accused of this, but in the story, that alone is not a crime, but he is implicated because the Vestal virgin in question is said to have been underage. But the footage that was framing him turns out to be fake, and the woman turns out to be over the age of 18, so it's all kosher in the end, and he's fine. But when this footage is aired, Cicero goes on this intense speech accusing Caesar Catalina of being the worst thing to happen to Rome, worst thing to happen to the city, to the country, an evil manipulator, and so on. And it is just such a Cicero moment. It is a pretty definite depiction of his speeches against Catiline in the Roman Senate, and that sort of made me kind of, a fan of that entire sequence. And I would say that the beginning part of the movie, where we're not really clear about what's going on, and the later part of the movie at the very end, where the mess of the storyline tries to, be resolved in the last 20 or maybe even 15 minutes of the movie, those are the weak points. But the middle part, everything surrounding this part of the movie, about the accusation, about the manipulations of the people around him, of his cousin Claudio, who seems to be a very clear analogy to Claudius, the leader of one of the political gangs of Rome during this time. And in fact, he ends up taking on this role directly, taking control of the rabble, promising them to improve their lives and, make their lives better and all that. Although it should be noted that Clodius was actually essentially a Caesar's ally historically. So once again, Adam Driver's character, bit more Catiline than Caesar. But it's appropriate then that Cicero is, in opposition to either of those parties. The entire lead up of this brewing unrest, this brewing rebellion against the government of the country and of the city of New Rome, the machinations of his cousin Clodio vying for power and the money of their uncle Crassus. It's all very intriguing, and it peaks in a scene where Catiline is giving an autograph to a child, and the child then shoots him in the face, which is where I have to bring up more oddities in the story and the way it progresses. There are two driving sci-fi fantasy points in this story, because the rest of it is pretty much just New York, real life, real America, but Roman. The sci-fi elements come from two, I guess, inventions, creations of Catalina. The one that's the most relevant to the story throughout the entire thing, the material that Megalopolis is made of, the material that then gets used to reconstruct his face, the material that allows him to see the past and see the future and do all kinds of insane things, the material that is never quite fully explained except for one extremely confusing scene, Megalon. And the other thing that he, I guess, invents is this power to stop time. He shouts time stop and everything around him stops. Except he doesn't stop, except he does, because if he, because in the opening it shows that he almost falls off a building, says time stop, and then pulls himself back up, which doesn't make any sense. How's that related to time stopping if he can still move? Why would he stop falling? But the thing is, this power is never relevant. It is implied some kind of relevancy in that he can pause time, look at things from different perspectives, analyze like the demolition of a building or something, and figure something out about Megalon and about construction. But other than that, it's completely plot irrelevant, save for acting as a metaphor for his love, his ability to stay in the moment when he moves on from all these problems, all his mental issues, and his love for his dead wife, to being able to live in that moment and have love for Julia. All well and good, but yeah, it serves pretty much no actual plot relevance. But again, I'm not going to say that that's either, here or there, because this movie does not ever feel like it's trying to make every single thing plot relevant. And that has hardly ever been the modus operandi for Coppola. I mean, look at the first two Godfather movies, absolute bangers, absolute classics, but so much of those films involves, long shots of various cultural events, of conversations, of meals, of this world and character building moments that don't, have kind of any plot relevance. They don't have to have that plot relevance. Even when it seems like such a Chekhov's gun for the time stop to be used in some productive, plot progressing way in some points, it doesn't have to, any more than The Godfather needing to have a scene where, someone cooks meatballs in a way that's plot relevant. It doesn't. Film is a medium which, isn't all about concisely telling some kind of story. If that were the case, you can just go read the plot summary on Wikipedia, and there you go, that's the entire film. But that's again not to say that there aren't flaws from the artistic side of things. And that's where I bring up the lowest point in the film, I would say personally for me, and the most confusing and the most artistically moment, which is a sequence where we're kind of explained what happened to, kind of explained what Megalon is all about, but also not. Essentially, Catalina's wife had been dealing with his bullshit for a very long time. He had been not the best husband. Then she finds something that makes her think that he's cheating on her. It's not explained if he ever did, but I think it's implied that it is true. So she drives off of a bridge and drowns. Even though she said she had good news, which turns out to be that she had been pregnant with twins. And then the death of his wife and those twins being there somehow reveals the secrets of Megalon to Catalina. Again, no explanation beyond that. It's just said, oh, that made me understand the secrets of Megalon. It sounds like, the tagline to some kind of self-help book, learn the secrets of Megalon. But that's all there is to it, and the entire scene and the editing on this part is very strange. It feels like very 70s, 80s low budget with soft focus fades and just floating heads talking, and it's a bit much and also not enough at the same time. Now, this is where I would like to move on to the conclusion here, because I don't think it's worth spoiling the story that much further, but there is a speech at the ending that Catalina gives, and there are a couple of other speeches and moments like these throughout the entire story that I won't retell the entire thing, but they are speeches about the future of humanity, the future of the country, the future of, the children in the story and the children not yet born, and it's all about building a better future, a united country, and so on. And those are all very sweet sentiments, but it's a bit heavy-handed at times. It feels like, it's not quite subtle in how it tells these things. It's very in your face, just like all the metaphors in the story are very in your face. So anyone who talks about, oh, you clearly just didn't understand the metaphors, that's why you don't like this film, that's absolute nonsense. You can dislike this film while fully understanding the very blatant and obvious metaphors used in the story, come on. But I can't really hold those speeches and, the writing in general being pretty mediocre at the best of times against Coppola, because once I got out of the cinema, and we were talking with my partner about this film and what we were thinking about it, I did one simple thing. I googled Ford Francis Coppola's age. The man is 85 years old. He has a long career behind him. He has a career of absolute classics, considered some of the best cinema ever made. Apocalypse Now, the first two Godfather films. But he also has made plenty of movies that are not remembered so fondly, like Jack or the third Godfather film. I was expecting something on the level of the third Godfather film, by the way, but that movie had even worse dialogue and nothing else going for it. And I can only imagine what it's like to have this lengthy and varied career behind you, to be touted as as one of the most brilliant directorial and writing minds of the 20th century, to being, lampooned a little bit and talked about how you haven't made anything that worthwhile in decades. People do say that, and I mean, sometimes it's hard to argue against. To have the peak of your career of like 40, 50 years ago, and to now be 85, and I can't imagine anyone being 85 and not inevitably at some point thinking about death, about what happens after, and about what you leave behind. There is one thing I will spoil here. One thing alone. That the character of Crassus, the uncle to Catalina and to Clodio here, is a very wealthy man, obviously. I mean, he's Crassus, again, the parallel with the Roman Republic here. And the story of Crassus originally is, of course, that he was the wealthiest man in Rome, but as the people around him, the other parts of the triumvirate, Pompey and Caesar, were going up in their careers, their political careers. They were increasing not just their political capital, but their physical capital as well. He was about to fade out of relevancy. So, before Caesar would return from his conquests in Gaul, and in that moment when he would return, he would be the richest man in Rome, thanks to all those conquests, thanks to all of the loot he gained. Crassus went east, and he died a pretty horrifying death, of his face, allegedly drowning and having his face melted in molten gold, fitting an ironic death for the wealthiest man in Rome, right? And in this story, Crassus very nearly dies. He almost loses everything, all the money, all the people around him, everything. So, at the very end, he decides to leave his money behind. All of the money that he has earned, everything, the bank, the assets, all of it would be left to Catalina and to the Megalopolis project, a project for the future. Doesn't care how much of his money is spent and lost and so on, he just wants to be remembered as a generous man that helped the world and helped humanity. And I can't help but think that if half of Coppola in this movie is in Cicero, the other half is in Crassus. I think Crassus is essentially a self-insert for Coppola here, a man past his prime, a man who has money, who has influence, who has this career behind him. Wow Platinum interviews him at the very beginning, and all she cares about, all she wants to ask about is his wealth. And he talks about how, well, for all his wealth, there are just things he doesn't have. He doesn't have love, he doesn't have affection in his life. There are just things that are missing. And I think another part that's missing is probably legacy. And I think for all of its faults, for all the failures in this film, I think Megalopolis is Coppola's, legacy. Not perhaps a legacy in the sense that, oh, this is what he'll be remembered for, but more so this is just feels like something he wanted to leave behind. He wanted to leave behind all these sappy speeches about the future and our children, about unity. He wanted to leave behind this crazy, unbelievable story that doesn't make sense at times, but it doesn't have to. This is not a story that exists just to be a story. It's a fable, like he calls it. It's a vessel for an idea, I guess. That the idea that we need to look forward and that we need to be united, They're lofty things, they might seem like platitudes, but I don't feel like they are. I think he just didn't know the most elegant way to put them, but that doesn't really discredit the ideas in the first place. Let me know if you have seen this film, what you think of it in the comments. I might do some more media analysis videos and so on. I just felt the need to have this video out here, to take the brave stand of saying, yeah, I like this movie despite the fact that someone will look at it and say it's objectively terrible. So that's gonna do it, and yeah, I'll see you in the next video. On his Twitter, I have not seen gameplay yet, maybe I've just missed it. I'm not joining the Discord because I don't goddamn want to. I have no idea if that game is going to be made. Lucas seems pretty busy, he seems pretty busy, making racist rants against people who have criticized his project.